about factors in resist and refusal dynamics. What I'm offering you is a working with these families perspective. And I'm hoping that this is really relevant to not only mental health people who might decide to be involved with these families, but to lawyers and judges who think about the importance or the relevance of having this multidisciplinary team and what the mental health professional can do. The very top of the pyramid is a lovely purple color that talks about a secure attachment with both parents. This is not a parent-child contact problem. This is what we hope all families have, whatever type of family and whatever configuration. And what we do know is that about 60% of all children have a secure attachment with both parents, and then about 40% have some division of different types of attachment. That's our starting point. And for the alienation cases, it's really important because if there never was an attachment, or the attachment was so disrupted, if you're missing for 10 years in someone's life, it's really hard to put that back together. The next part, in the beginnings of differentiation of parent-child relationships, is what we call affinity. And affinity is really a preference for one parent, and it's based on age, it's based on gender. And I thought actually my best example was our youngest child. My husband and I, our youngest is 30. He, from the time he was probably 4 or 5 till now at 30, he prefers talking with my husband about fishing. Now I fish, but my husband is the person that he prefers, and that's where he spends his time talking about fishing. With me, he spends his time, it's emerged from science and math to writing to politics, and that's really more of his interest and mine. So if the affinity that a child has is so one-sided, I think it's important for us to think about, because when we look at cases that come to the very bottom of the spectrum of alienation, we're going to want to know what the timeshare in the family looked like, and if the affinity was so strong, it may be a factor. So now let's talk about the aligned parent. So alignment is moving more in the direction of potential parent-child contact problems. But it tends to happen around divorce-specific reasons, whether there's been an affair, whether there's been remarriage. It results in a loyalty conflict for the kids. Now, these kids still are encouraged by the parent that they may be closer to see the other parent. So it isn't a forced choice. The child is spending more time with one parent but still seeing both. Now let's talk about the abuse side, or what's called justified rejection. Some children are subject to abuse. They either witness intimate partner violence, they are physically abused, they are sexually abused, and so these are justified reasons why a child might not want to see a parent. So these would not be alienation at all, but in my work with abused kids, I can tell you some of these kids still want to and long to see their parents. They don't look like alienated kids. They're abused, but still have a longing. Then we move to alienation in the most struggle of parent-child contact problems. And with alienation, I want to go back up to when I was talking about attachment. This parent, who is now kind of moving, not by his or her choice, out of the picture, previously had a good relationship with the child. And without the behaviors of the favored parent, the child wouldn't have rejected the other parent. It can be mild, it can be moderate, it can be severe, it can be picking up on a child's suggestions, it can be encouraging a child, it can be overtly directing a child. The important thing to know also is that both parents might engage in parenting alienation behaviors. Not all kids become alienated. So in many separations and divorces, there is lots of denigration going on and a lot of other factors. 80% of kids, at least in the research that I've read, do not become alienated. They maintain contact with both parents. So we're dealing with the 15 or 20% that do end up losing contact to some degree. So we have the affinity that I talked about, the alignment that I talked about. What I want to add in is, in families, we have ranges of parenting. We all know this. We have poor parenting, which can be rigid parenting, lax parenting, absent parenting. We have potentially compromised parenting, where there are mental health issues, alcohol or substance abuse issues. They become more problematic when there's a divorce or separation. So let's talk about what's justified rejection. Well, certainly physical abuse, where you have unwanted physical contact with a person, and it can be, biting, scratching, pushing, shoving. I had one parent who said, but I just picked her up and moved her out of the doorway. And of course, he did not consider that to be anything that was aggressive, but she considered it to be intimate partner violence. So you get different perceptions from these parents about abuse, but nonetheless, physical, certainly emotional, but emotional abuse is really trying to tricking a victim into doubting their own perceptions. And then now we also have considerable online control and stalking and other measures. Sexual abuse is any action that coerces someone into doing something sexually that they don't want. And I put financial on here because I think financial becomes really important, because it's between the parents, but if you think those kids don't hear, finance comes into it, whether we want to or not. Alienation cases are, by definition, high conflict cases. There is active engagement, willful, or sometimes not quite so conscious, destruction of a relationship with one parent by the other. Disparaging comments by parents are common. As the conflict increases and as the time decreases with one parent, the parent who's being rejected, of course, the favorite parent has more time to disparage. So disparaging comments, and these may escalate to active undermining. I want you to note that any of these issues are on a continuum from mild to moderate to severe. So, for example, a favorite parent may passively endorse unreasonable aversion through support of a child's feelings. The child says this, I'm going to support it even though I think the child may or may not be off. I'm supporting it, and I'm going to express my negative opinions too. That's the beginning, kind of mild stage. A favorite parent may endorse the child's feelings and actively express and add their own and elaborate. And that's moving into the more moderate stage. And then you get the extreme parental alienation behaviors that include really deliberate effort to hurt the rejected parent through all sorts of measures and to remove that parent from the child's life. That's their goal. So mild, moderate, severe, very quick examples. This is the alienating behaviors. The one that I would like to pick is the false allegations of abuse. So you have this, let's say, 7-year-old girl going to dad's house. and mom says, I just want to have this little talk with you. You haven't gone there yet, and I just want to say, be careful. Just be careful. And the 7-year-old says, what do you mean be careful? It's my dad. And mom says, well, I noticed like 2 or 3 times over the past year when things have gotten rough, Dad stayed in the bed with you a little too long, read the book, and actually even fell asleep in the bed with you. I just don't think that's such a good thing. And the little girl may say, well, it was kind of nice having Dad read to me. And, he got up and left. And the mom says, look, when you go to Dad's house, I do not want Dad in the bed with you. If that happens, call me. And before you go to bed, I want you to lock the door. So what has this mom started to do? Started to implant fear into a child. And the child then, if it's reinforced enough, starts to become afraid. So these are characteristics of an alienated child. The 8 R's are pretty easy to memorize. I think the rigid refusal and the rehearsed script and the 0 regrets are the ones that really jump out at me. These kids are phenomenal in the lack of remorse or regret they show about just cutting off a parent from their life. I also want to talk about a parenting continuum. So in intact families or in separating and divorced families or families that are doing pretty well on the separation, the parenting continuum is such that you have a large chunk of good enough parenting. That's warm, attuned parents who are responsive to their kids, and they're able to manage and navigate the waters of this emotional upheaval and do it with some degree of grace. These are not the people we see, but there are people that do this. In high conflict, I think that large group of parents that are good enough parents, I think get incredibly challenged. So with the high conflict and with the different allegations and issues and with the litigation that comes up, I think you go from having this good enough large part of the slide down to that gets smaller, compromised parenting rises, so you get harsh, critical, self-centered, misattuned parenting that comes up. You get impaired parenting. So in these separation and divorce, vulnerabilities are triggered. They become so powerful in these cases. So mental illness may get triggered, substance abuse. Certainly we know that personality disorders absolutely get triggered. And I would contend that within these personality disorders, these are people with histories of generational trauma that we don't know about. With personality disorders being exacerbated, those are in the self and interpersonal areas. So as the parenting ability is diminished, whether personality disorder or trauma, the negative symptomatology of the parents gets worse. And the self-impairment gets worse. They're either preoccupied, withdrawn, hovering over, protecting, gatekeeping, and the interpersonal impairment is incredible. So there's no co-regulation of affect, and so what we see in the co-parenting or lack thereof is anger, 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 escalation, escalation. Neither parent can regulate affect of harsh, critical, or even distant and running away affect. They can't see or understand others' feelings or suffering, and intimacy is really gone, and most of the time remorse is gone. We need to know, is there intimate partner violence? Is there impaired parenting? And you have a list in the slides that we just talked about of this. Is there compromised parenting? Was there a previous positive relationship with the child? If there was no previous positive relationship, it's going to be awfully hard to reconnect a parent with a child because you're re-looking at forming or the beginning of a relationship. What has the co-parenting relationship been look like in the intact family? Is there alienation? If there is it mild, moderate, or severe? And have there been previous therapy attempts? What we know about these families that finally end up with us, and we could be the second or third or fourth therapist, these kids don't want to be there. The parents have lost hope. So it is incumbent on us as therapists who are either referred these cases or the people who are doing the referring to look at, was there a past referral for therapy, and who was included, and was it successful or not? Because you don't want to be the third or fourth person trying to do the same thing that's already been done. Negative effects of alienation, the one that I would point out is that children who come to believe unfounded abuse alienations are very scary. There are children who believe that they were, that their dad either kicked or punched them in their mother's stomach. Well, that probably didn't come from the kid's memory, but I've also had kids who believe that their parent poisoned them and then raped them. But I had a very difficult time dispelling kids of this belief. This is a huge amount of work. So in that abuse one, and I picked it because I wanted to talk about the cycle of fear and anxiety, you get a parent who, as I've said, kind of helps exacerbate the fear, lock your door, be careful with dad. You get a child who starts to feel anxious about being with dad, who she never felt anxious about before. The parent talks more about, oh, what happened when you were at dad's? Did he read to you? Did he stay in the bed? Well, did he touch you? And you have a child who becomes increasingly anxious. The child begins to have anticipatory anxiety, so becomes afraid of going because of what the child has heard. This child's distress then triggers in the parent who has started this, oh my God, I can't send you. I'm going to put 911 right into your telephone, and I want you to call me right away. So you have an escalating cycle of fear and anxiety, a real phobia for the child. And this is a nice cartoon talking about unconditional love. Just remember, son, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose unless you want daddy's love. That is how these parents feel. So the little bit that we learned from Overcoming Barriers research, and we've done it for, I think, 3 years. So what we found out with some of the research is that co-parenting relationships were directly related to children spending more time with both parents. And we had better parent-child outcomes on a very limited sample. So I don't think you can generalize a whole lot from it, but this is what one part I was able to pull. And the time the children spend are associated with improved cooperative parenting. So that's great. They work in synergy. The better the co-parenting relationship, the better the parent-child contact relationship. Another important thing is that the majority of people who came to our program did not feel that we met our expectations. And I just want to generalize this to say, when you meet with these parents, whatever work you are part of doing with them, you need to deal with their expectations and your expectations, because without that, something gets missed and people are dissatisfied, and then you're not going to help them. So what do? We don't have good research to tell us where to go. We know alienation exists. We know it presents on a continuum. We can identify the alienating behaviors, but we don't know what treatment works. What do we look at in the child? We look at how long the strained parent-child relationship has occurred. We have found in our work, and I found actually in my personal work, that if it's a duration of more than 2 years, I'm really not going to get very far unless there's been contact in between. We look at the rigidity of a child's perceptions. We look at Gardner's 8 behaviors, which I actually would like to read to you. It's the campaign of denigration against the targeted parent, the weak, frivolous, absurd reasons for rejection, the lack of ambivalence, the denial by these kids that they're being influenced, so they don't believe they're being influenced. And if you say, well, did you hear that from Dad by any chance? Oh no, I'm an independent thinker. I know exactly where I got this, and it's from inside me. So the automatic, unquestioning support for the favorite parent, the use of borrowed scenarios. It was in my tummy that I know I first got kicked because Dad did it, and a campaign of hatred and rejection that spreads to the entire family. The other last part that we learned from the research is planting seeds of hope in these families is so important. I actually think it's generically important for everyone to help, either to help people see that there's hope or to hold the hope for these people if they can't see it themselves. I don't think you can move forward without hope. And the importance of providing clinical and legal follow-up. These families are not internally motivated. They're not coming to you and saying, oh, please help me. We are really distressed with this problem. Their internal motivation is low. The external motivation needs to be higher. That's the court. So a cartoon. So what kind of a situation is this? Andy and I don't see things eye to eye anymore. He wants an amiable split up, maybe mediation, and I want him to fry in the unquenching inferno of the underworld. Okay, how easy is it going to be to work with that parent, and what do you have to do? These are the kinds of people we get. The work needed up front when we're doing outpatient reunification work. We need a comprehensive history of relationships. We need to know about attachments. We need to work toward an evolution or a creation of overlapping goals. If there are no overlapping goals, if Andy's soon-to-be ex-spouse is over here wanting really to do him harm from whatever reasons are going on with her, and Andy is saying she is a severe borderline that he is diagnosed, and I want the kids to have nothing to do with her, there are no mutual goals there. There's no mutual self-interest. You're not going to get very far. You need to respect the subjective understanding. We may view, after we interview everybody, that there are views on both sides that don't overlap, but that you could kind of bring together. These parents don't see overlapping views, and you need to not ally with, but respond to their subjective understanding. If you don't, you're invalidating them. You lose them. Doesn't work. Same with the child. The child has a subjective understanding. If you don't form a relationship based on hearing, listening, and hearing what a child has to say, whether at some point you're going to later work with that and try to have the child understand that it's a distorted perception, if you don't initially take it in and understand their subjective view, you don't get anywhere. There is the external motivation. The most important thing for any of us who are on the therapeutic end is that court order needs to specify parenting time. Because these families come to us with the hope and belief that we're going to change it. If I can convince you that he is terrible or she has been awful, then you'll write a letter to the court for me, right? Wrong. Hopefully you come with, for the judges in the room and the attorneys, you need a clear, concise order with parenting time specified. If the court does not believe there can be shared parenting, you have no work to do. Any form of shared parenting, but that both parents need to be involved in the child's life. I think it's important for the court to specify that all family members and significant others are involved in treatment, because I think that if the court specifies reunification therapy and a therapist interprets that as, oh, Dad and this child have a problem, let me just bring them in and work with them, well, I think that's a serious problem, because you've got countervailing forces that are pulling against everything you're doing. It's really important, again, the court is the one that has the authority here to help you. You don't need any more problems arguing about sanctions or who's going to pay for services. That all needs to be just so carefully spelled out in a court order. And if the court can say the parents must cooperate with this intervention process, and I want to see this family again in 90 days with some kind of a report, whatever, from this reunification process as to whether or not there's cooperation, that is immensely helpful. You have a time period and you have a way of reporting back to the court. This would be your ideal family. If you can get these mutual goals, if you can get parents to agree that it's important for children to have healthy relationships with both parents. Now, usually the parents will agree to that, but somebody will say, well, it's got to be safe. It's got to be safe and healthy. And that's fine. You can discuss safety, but you've got an agreement on the two-parent part. So it works. That there is some room for communication in your co-parenting relationship. Most people can get there. They don't start there, but they may be willing to agree to that. That each member of the co-parenting team agrees that they've been part of the problem and they are willing to become part of the solution, and they acknowledge that there are specific skills that they can learn to achieve their goals, and that a culture of mutual respect, which they don't come in with, is essential. But if you can work toward those goals and can get agreement on them, then you can move ahead. Okay, I loved this picture. They come in with zero motivation. In fact, they are fighting with each other. One parent may want to come, particularly the rejected parent wants to come and see their kid because they're being denied, and they think for all the wrong reasons. But the other parent is not motivated because he or she thinks, kids are much better off with me. They don't need another parent. That parent has been destructive or abusive or has hurt me. And so the motivation is certainly not there on both sides. And the court can be helpful there. So even if you get to, I won't do it, or I can't do it, that's an improvement in motivation. Some strategies to get less stuck. So these are strategies to really, in motivational interviewing terms, evoke ambivalence, create conflict, create questioning, because that's what you need to do with these people who aren't really very interested in listening to all you have to say about the benefits of two children in a family, and they're not going to hear that, but they may hear, are you happy with yourself? Are you happy with the way your life is going right now? Let's list the ways you're happy. And people are willing to identify emotional hot buttons. That's the one thing that I found that people are willing to work at across the board. I do get triggered. He triggers me or she triggers me. It's blame, but they're willing to acknowledge they get triggered. So you have a basis to start. Okay, I get triggered. What can I do? What skill can I learn not to be triggered? I loved this picture. And the statement is from Indira Gandhi. You can't shake hands with a clenched fist. Mediation is not going to work if you come at it like this.
Thank you so much. Again, a nice, beautiful end of applause.